Hello, my name is Mary Jo Daher, and I'm presenting my thesis on reading direction and visual attention. Research on reading direction and attention often generalizes results of readers that read scripts that are written from left to right, such as English, French, and Spanish, or from right to left, such as Arabic, Farsi, and Hebrew. As research is often conducted exclusively on these populations, they can seem to divide readers. This image shows the distribution of reading-writing systems, specifically countries in blue read from left to right, and countries in orange read from right to left. However, little research has actually considered bidirectional reading. A considerable number of people living in the Middle East or immigrants can read comfortably in both left to right and right to left. People like my parents or my extended family, for example, are part of this group that is here called bidirectional readers. Because of this, the questions that drove the study were whether visual attention differs based on the ability to read in one or two directions, and whether the spread of attention around a target is asymmetric depending on reading experiences, meaning, does reading create a sided attentional bias? The goal of the study is to investigate the degree to which reading direction biases visual attention using the Eriksen flanker task. The most well-known version of the task involves arrows pointing in different directions. Participants are instructed to press one of two buttons indicating the direction of the arrow in the middle. If it's pointing to the left, they press the left arrow key, and if it's pointing to the right, they press the right arrow key. The middle arrow is surrounded by other arrows, which are called flankers. The flankers can either point in the same direction as the middle arrow, and it's called a congruent trial, or they point in opposite directions, and it's called an incongruent trial. In these examples, the correct answer for the congruent trial is to press the left arrow, and the correct answer for the incongruent trial is to press the right arrow. You can imagine that the task is easier if the center arrow points in the same direction as the flankers, and it's more difficult in an incongruent trial. People are actually typically slower and less accurate in the incongruent condition. This task is interesting because it involves symmetric flankers that are the same on both sides. In my study, I took the task and modified it to see whether the asymmetry of flankers impacted results. One of the most well-known examples of visual biases is the pseudo-neglect effect, which states that healthy individuals allocate more attention to the left side of a space than the right. This effect was shown with a very simple task. People were asked to locate the middle of a horizontal line. Try it for yourself. Put your finger on where you think the center of the line is. While the center would be here, people generally make left-sided errors. While people typically make the same left-sided errors, other studies have found that reading direction can have an influence. For example, French participants who read from left to right bisect more towards the left, whereas Israeli participants who read from right to left bisect more towards the right. However, the visual biases may depend on the type of task. For example, other tendencies have been found in cancellation tasks, where participants are asked to look through plenty of stimuli and mark off a specific target. Here in this example, they must draw a diagonal line through the triangles, which would look like this. A study in 2021 showed that while right-to-left readers from Saudi Arabia show the same right-sided bias in bisection task, and left-to-right readers from Western populations show the same left-sided bias, both groups begin scanning in the same way. They begin scanning from the left and they move towards the right. Because different scanning strategies are observed in different types of tasks, it's interesting to verify whether these similar biases exist in the flanker task. It's also worth asking, what about individuals who can read in more than one direction? What about people like my parents or other bilinguals who can read from both right to left and left to right? Here, these individuals are called bidirectional readers or bidirectional bilinguals. They can read in scripts that are written in both directions. For example, English-Arabic bilinguals are bidirectional readers. Because their scanning habits occur in opposite directions, it may also influence the directional biases in visual tasks. To verify whether the visual attention of bidirectional readers differs from that of unidirectional readers who can read in only one direction, this present study compared bidirectional to unidirectional bilinguals. The unidirectional group consisted of 14 individuals who can read only from left to right. Common languages were English and French, and they were aged 1961. The bidirectional group consisted of 16 individuals who read in languages written from left to right and right to left. They could all read in French and or English, and the right to left languages that they knew were Arabic and Farsi. They were aged 19 to 59. Considerably, 11 of them were born outside of Canada in countries of the Middle East, such as Lebanon, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. All participants engaged in a language proficiency questionnaire and a simple word translation task at the beginning of the study to make sure that they were all comfortable and frequently used the languages and that they truly knew the languages that they indicated. Bidirectional bilinguals were recruited first, and then unidirectionals were matched in age. Readers of languages that can read vertically from top to bottom, such as Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, were excluded from the study to ensure simply that left to right and right to left reading was the only directions that were considered. All participants had normal or normal to corrected vision. Because other visual tasks show contradictory results when looking at bidirectional bilinguals, the original flanker task was modified to look at attentional asymmetries. In the original study, participants are shown letters and are instructed to respond to the center letter while ignoring the flankers. Each letter is associated with a response. For example, when they see the letters H or K, they must press the left arrow key, and when they see S or D, they press the right arrow key. Three conditions exist: one where the flanker and the targets are the same, the flankers and the target belong to the same response, which is a congruent trial, or flankers and the target belong to opposite responses, which is an incongruent trial. Incongruent flankers increase reaction times compared to compatible or congruent flankers. Because I wanted to look at asymmetries in visual biases, I modified the presentations of flankers. Instead of having flankers on both the left and right sides symmetrically, I presented flankers either only to the left of the target or only to the right of the target. This allowed me to look at whether specific sides had more of an influence than the other. In general, with respect to the findings of the original research, incongruent flankers to the left and the right are expected to increase response times in both groups. In unidirectional readers, a higher sensitivity to information presented on the left side was expected, meaning that incongruent flankers are expected to slow down reaction times more than those to the right. And in bidirectional readers, a reduced side bias was expected, meaning they were expected to have the same responses bilaterally. The study began with the language proficiency questionnaire, then the simple translation task. There were 16 practice trials that were given, and during these practice trials, feedback was given to reinforce correct responses. The goal was to teach participants the appropriate task responses and stimulus associations. 160 testing trials were conducted, where reaction times were recorded. These trials were randomized, and breaks were given after each block of 32 trials. The task used in the study included the following characteristics. 5 stimuli were presented. The stimuli were Cypriot letters, and this was to ensure that none of the participants were familiar with the symbols and that the stimuli were meaningless to all. The Cypriot letters were grouped in the following way. The curvier, more rounded symbols were associated to the same response. Angular, more straight symbols were associated to the same response, and a last neutral letter was included, which was not associated to a response. This allowed me to create an asymmetrical presentation. The stimulus presentation looked like the following. Either the flankers were on the left and the neutral symbol was on the right, or the neutral symbol was on the left and the target and the flanker symbols were on the right. Here are examples of all the possible conditions that existed. On top, you see the congruent presentations, and on the bottom, you see the incongruent presentations. You might notice that the flanker and the target are never the same symbol. And keeping the same instructions as before, the curvier symbols were associated to the same response. Here, the response would be the Y keyboard key, and the straight symbols were associated to the same response, which would be the B keyboard key. This was to reduce directional influences by using left and right arrow keys. Using this keyboard layout, it reduced this right-sided and left-sided influences. And then here are the examples of the correct answers. So these were responded to with the Y keyboard key, and these were responded to with the B keyboard key. To better understand the tasks that participants engaged in, here's how the task was set up. Participants saw the instructions before each block of trials. A red center fixation appeared on screen for 1000 milliseconds. 5 symbols flashed on screen, replacing the fixation. They appeared very briefly for only 200 milliseconds. This ensured that participants did not look elsewhere than the center. After 200 milliseconds, the symbols disappeared and the screen remained blank until participants gave their responses. Here, the amount of time they took was recorded. Once the response was given, everything repeated. Fixation returned to the center of the screen and the next trial began. Here's what the task would have looked like to participants to show the speed of the trials. So the fixation appeared, and here they gave the responses. The fixation returned, and then they gave their responses. The median reaction time for correct trials was analyzed as distributions were skewed. A 2x2x2 mixed factorial ANOVA with the between subject variable reading direction and the within subject variables flanker location and congruency was conducted. Bidirectionals had a smaller median reaction time for congruent compared to incongruent trials, whereas unidirectionals did not have any differences. These results show that when positioned to the left and the right side, the incongruent flankers slow down bidirectionals but not unidirectional readers. The effect of flanker location was not significant, showing that bidirectionals reacted the same to flankers on the left and the right side. This was expected. However, so did the unidirectional readers, and this was not expected. All the other effects were not significant. The original flanker effect was replicated in bidirectional bilinguals, but not unidirectional bilinguals. But why? The modifications that were made to the original flanker task, such as the unilateral design, may have influenced these results. Other studies who have also used unilateral designs noted that the distances between the flankers and the target influence the strength of the flanker effect. As the distances increased, the influence of the flankers decreased. In this study, the distances were not manipulated, so exploring this could be interesting. The task symbols could have also influenced the results, specifically the complexity and the type of symbol used. While the Cypriot letters were chosen to reduce familiarity, there were similarities between the Cypriot letters and the typical Roman letters, such as they were of similar complexity. This could have led to better performance of unidirectional readers. The Cypriot letters were also less complex than Arabic scripts. Because of this, they could have influenced the vulnerability of bidirectionals to the influence of flankers. Again, this would be very interesting to explore further. The clear difference in the results of bidirectional bilinguals brings an interesting perspective on the differences between both groups. Why did the bidirectional bilinguals have slower reactions? The first reason may be due to their capacity to pay attention to a larger bilateral space. Because they are used to paying attention to both sides, the conflicts created by incongruent information have bilateral effects and are not biased to only one side. However, this needs to be explored further. The second reason may be because of a possible larger cultural difference between the groups. Specifically, most of the bidirectional participants were born in the Middle East. Prior research noted that participants from the Middle East, such as Turkish people, often had slower reaction times in visual search tasks, but this was made up by their higher accuracy. These same tendencies were seen in change detection tasks. Overall, this may be due to a larger attentional spotlight or a more broad and holistic scanning strategies, meaning they integrate more information when they look at a perceptual space, but this may result in them taking more time and being more vulnerable to conflicting information. Overall, these results were very interesting, and further research is needed to validate the differences observed. Thank you very much, and here are all the references used.